Hey, good afternoon to everybody again, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to come here and for obviously covering this aspect of the story. You know, clearly today in particular, I think we all know that there are some ongoing events happening here in Kabul. I don't have all the details and I don't have all of the information on that, and I'm sure several of you will probably get updates during the course of this. But what we do know, and I think we know enough about it right now, I want to begin by absolutely and unequivocally condemning yet another senseless and absolutely indiscriminate act by the Taliban, an act of violence which is clearly causing more pain and suffering on the people of Kabul. And in summary, it's just shameful. Regardless of what you hear, there is absolutely no justification for this type of action. And so I also want to pass on our very deepest sympathies and our condolences for the victims of this absolutely atrocious act. And of course, we'll all get more details on it. But the final point I'd leave you with on that is that this essentially reaffirms and redoubles what it is that Resolute Support is here to do. As General Nicholson spoke just a couple of days ago, we are here to conduct the train, advise, and assist for our Afghan partners so they can defend themselves against these types of attacks. And when we see these types of events, it absolutely reaffirms what we're here to do, and it does redouble our efforts, and we'll continue to provide that support to our Afghan partners. I do want to hit on a couple of additional points before we open it up to questions. And really the first one, and I think you've all seen this already, but obviously I want to once again confirm that as part of a larger ANDSF operation up in northern Kunduz, the United States did take a kinetic strike and killed Mullah Salam, as well as some of his key associates and his key leaders. And we do think that this is a particularly important event. Number one, and I think you all know this, but as a reminder, Mullah Salam has been the commander of Taliban forces up in the north, and specifically in Kunduz. And he is the one who's been responsible for the level of violence over the last couple of years and the multiple attacks on not only Kunduz city, but on multiple locations throughout the north and up in Kunduz. He's been responsible for this tremendous suffering that the people of Kunduz have had to endure. And when you think about the images of Kunduz over the last couple of years, unfortunately you have these images of refugees fleeing Kunduz city and living in the outdoors and having to endure these terrible conditions. And you think about images of schools that have been destroyed and houses that have been destroyed and power plants and bridges and really lives being destroyed. And again, Mullah Salam was the one responsible for this. And ultimately, we do think that this is a positive step, but we know that there's going to be more fighting. And we know that there will unfortunately be more death. But I do believe, and we do believe, that his death does provide a window, and it provides an opportunity for those in the Taliban who are beginning to recognize that there is no military solution to this. The only solution is going to have to be reconciliation. And our hope is that some in the Taliban will take this opportunity to go ahead and recognize that and take the appropriate steps to move towards reconciliation. The next topic I want to talk about, and I want to highlight the ongoing and the recent actions of the ANDSF down in southern Nangarhar. And I think that you're all aware that the 201st Corps, for about a month now, has been conducting operations in Khat and Daybala specifically to target ISIS down there. And I'd really refer you over to the MOD and certainly to the 201st Corps and to the leadership in Nangarhar for the details on what they've done. But in our view, they have been very successful. And while they have had some U.S. air support, by and large, this has been a 201st Corps operation. And I think it really provides us another opportunity to kind of look at what has been accomplished against ISIS over the last year. And some of you have heard me touch on this before, but when we look at where we were on the 1st of March 2016, there were somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 members of ISIS that were in southern Nangarhar, and they were occupying almost 11 districts in that area, and they were bringing all sorts of pain and pressure to the people of southern Nangarhar. And of course, where are we on the 1st of March 2017? We believe that there are approximately 700 members of ISIS, perhaps even less now, based on the operations, but we think probably approximately 700 members of ISIS that are still contained to less than 3 districts down in southern Nangarhar. And as we look over 2016 as well, we know that the United States, as a part of these larger Afghan operations, was able to kill the top 12 leaders of ISIS. They were able, specifically Hafez Syed Khan, but was also able to kill some of their close associates. The leader of the TGG, the Tariq Ghidar group. Of course, this was the group that was responsible for the horrific attack in Peshawar at the end of 2014 that resulted in the death of well over 100 children. But he was killed. And then also the leader of the IJU was killed as well. And so when we look at what was accomplished in 2016, primarily by the ANDSF against ISIS, but with assistance from the United States, there was absolutely success against this terrible threat. And we believe that as we go into 17, just as the 201st Corps has just demonstrated, we believe we'll see more of that. The final point I want to touch on really, and again, some of you have heard me talk about this, is the winter campaign plan and what we have seen by the ANDSF throughout the winter. And of course, I think as you all know, the ANDSF has been able to keep pressure on the enemy, be it in southern Nangarhar, in Kunduz, etc. But the other big aspect of the winter campaign plan that we have tried to assist them with, and it was a very deliberate plan, was to take the opportunity to deliberately regenerate capability and develop more capacity within the security services. And the intent behind the whole effort was to make the ANDSF stronger as we go into 2017 than where they concluded the fighting season in 2016. And there were really four big aspects to this: leadership, really training, material support, and then also accountability of their people. So let me begin with leadership. And again, as you've heard us say before, we believe that good leadership is the absolute foundation, and it's critical to the success of the security services. We have found that when the security services don't perform well, it's typically because there are poor leaders. It's leaders that are not taking care of their soldiers, that may even be exploiting their soldiers. And frankly, we find that if we've got good, solid leaders, then the Afghan forces fight better than any other force, and they don't end up losing on the battlefield, and they do that very, very well. So as we look at 2000 and this winter of 16 and 17, thank you, Kay, for that, no doubt. But as we look at 2016 going into 2017, this government has really focused on replacing leaders who simply weren't accomplishing what they need to accomplish. Some of them were not the most effective leaders. Some of them were corrupt. And some of those leaders have now either been court-martialed or they have gone in front of the Anti-Corruption Justice Center and they have been convicted. But by and large, we've seen the security services replace leaders at all levels, whether it's in the Air Force or in the Corps or at the Kandak level, or frankly, even within some of the administrative areas, within the logistics areas. And they've made a concerted effort to identify solid leaders and put them into place. The second aspect of it is the Afghans are now beginning to move towards this concept of a centralized and merit-based selection system. And so in the past, what we've seen is leaders have been chosen for all sorts of different reasons. Some of those very valid, and frankly, some of those not very valid. And so the effort and the direction that the Afghans are going is to essentially come up with these centralized selection boards that allow a group of officers to look at the capabilities, look at the performance, and then look at the potential for their leaders and identify the right leader to go into these critical leadership positions. And it's got a ways to go. It's got some work, but there's already a good start with it. And the Afghans are working to make that really the way that they choose their leadership. The final component to it is the Afghans have really been investing in their leader development, and that starts at the basic area where officers are trained here in Afghanistan at the National Officer Academy, and so we are seeing more of an investment there. We're seeing more of an investment with officers as they move through their career, and again, this is going to take some time. We're talking about institutional changes that just don't happen overnight. But perhaps most interesting is right now, for the first time that we're aware of, the Afghans have chosen non-commissioned officers that performed very well out in combat, and they have now put them into these officer academies so that they will become officers and they'll be able to lead Afghans as well. And again, we think that's a positive development. The second area I want to touch on is training. And again, I think you've all heard me describe before this idea of trying to assist the Afghans as they develop operational readiness cycles. And again, what that is taking a portion of your force and having that portion of the force fighting, while another portion of the force is taking leave, working on individual things, and then the third portion of your force is really trying to work on collective training and preparing to go into combat. And that's a difficult balance to work, particularly when you have the pressures that the security services have on a daily and weekly and monthly basis. But what we've seen over the winter is that the Afghans have done a very good job of trying to set their forces like that so they can continue to keep pressure on the Taliban, but they can also give their soldiers and policemen leave and then also prepare and do this collective training that is absolutely critical as we move into the spring. And let me begin with the Special Operations Forces. I think you've all heard me say before, they continue to be the absolute best in this region. And last year, they were responsible for conducting about 70% of the ANA's offensive operations. But by the end of the year, they were stretched. An awful lot had been asked of them. But they were, over the winter, absolutely able to hit this cycle that I described. They were able to reset their troops. They were able to bring in additional troops. They got additional equipment, and they went through this collective training, all at the same time while being able to maintain a presence on the battlefield and being able to engage. And what we know is as they go into the spring fighting, they are absolutely going to be stronger than where they were in the fall. And even at the Kandak and even at the Corps level, we have seen the Corps work to do this operational readiness cycle pretty well as well. And based on the various circumstances, various Corps had more success than others. But when we look at the 201st Corps, or the 203rd Corps, or even the 215th Corps, which of course has been under tremendous pressure in Helmand, what we've seen is that they were able to bring units off the line, they were able to re-equip them and retrain them. There was one Kandak in particular that was down to about 200 members when we hit November. They went into this training cycle, and they've just been reintroduced back into Lashkar Gah, 700 members, fully equipped, fully trained, and they are ready to conduct operations. And that is the overall goal to be able to do. The next point I want to touch on is the material support and what all has happened with that. Of course, in the course of a fighting season, material and equipment is damaged and destroyed. And so since October, what the U.S. and RS have been able to do is provide over 900 new Humvees. They provided enough weapons to equip 14 Kandaks, and then they've been able to provide enough ammunition out into the force so that the ANA and the ANP are going to be able to fight all the way into the fall just with what they have right now. But perhaps most important is as we look to the future of 17, what are we going to see? And as we've mentioned before, but I do want to remind everybody, in 2017, the Afghan Air Force is going to get another 8 A-29 attack aircraft. So today they have 8. This time last year they had 0. This time today they have 8 attack aircraft that are conducting operations around the country. And by the end of 2017, they will have another 8 aircraft with the pilots and with the maintainers and with the men on the ground, the Afghan terminal air controllers, being able to coordinate those fires. And it's going to provide a tremendous bump and a tremendous extra piece of what the Afghans need to be able to do to defend themselves. And then the last piece, and I'll just touch on it briefly, is accountability. So to really be able to understand what you need and where your need needs to be applied, you have to first off understand how many people you have, and you have to understand how much equipment you have. And so one of the big efforts that the ANDSF has been doing over the winter is they've been trying to take proper accountability and properly enroll their soldiers and their policemen into the larger system. And so that's a function of biometrics, it's a function of ID cards, it's a function of several different things, but that has been an effort that's ongoing. And just really since the beginning of 2017, we've seen an additional 20,000 ANA soldiers properly enrolled in this process. These processes will continue through the summer because at times, as you can imagine, it's difficult to be able to get into some of the remote areas to make sure that you've got the proper accountability via enrolling them. But that is going to continue along, and we feel confident that that's headed in the right direction. We're doing similar things with their equipment. And again, none of this is going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But being able to account for their equipment, being able to identify where it is, and then making sure that you can replace it when it genuinely needs to be replaced. So I say all that, and again, the real purpose and the real effort of this was to make the Afghans stronger as we start the 2017 fighting season than they were when we concluded at the end of 2016. and we believe that they absolutely are stronger. They've got better leadership. They have been through more training. They've got better equipment. And we believe that although it's going to be a difficult 2017, we do believe that the Afghan security services are stronger than they were when we started the winter. And a lot of this stuff that I've described really is not particularly glamorous. It doesn't catch a whole lot of headlines, but it's absolutely critical in terms of being able to build institutions. And ultimately, as we've described before, you know, that's where we are trying to get. We're trying to build these sustainable security capabilities that really are not just designed for a fight tonight or for the battle next month, but really things that will endure, that allow the Afghans to secure their nation and be able to address these terrorist threats. So with that, maybe a little bit longer than I intended, but I appreciate your patience with that, and I welcome your questions.
Questions, if you could, again, wait for the microphone to come to you. Josh, please.
Josh Smith with Reuters. Can you give us an update on whatever deliberations might be happening over the future size of you know, the NATO mission here, the troop levels? And then are there any sort of, can you give us a timetable, I guess, that we can, you know what's coming up as far as that? When do decisions have to be made? When are they likely to be?
Yeah, Josh, thank you for the question. As I think most of you are aware, and if you have not had the opportunity to go back and watch General Nicholson's testimony in front of the U.S. Senate, I think it would be valuable. It really does provide his views on the situation here. And a great companion piece to that, frankly, he did a press conference at the beginning of December at the Pentagon, and that one also really provides his views on 2016. But as Josh is alluding to, there has been discussion, and General Nicholson did talk about it publicly, about the idea that the mission probably does require a few thousand additional troops. And it's not just the U.S. aspect, that's really a part of a larger NATO piece. And so the deliberations, the Secretary General, Josh, has really probably addressed this better than I can, but what he said is that he recognizes, and NATO recognizes, that there are some shortfalls in the mission and that it's going to be addressed in the spring, and that NATO will be engaging on that. And so General Nicholson obviously stays in very close touch with his NATO chain of command, and he also stays in very close touch with his U.S. chain of command. And what we would expect is the new administration, as the new U.S. administration, as they look at all of their future policy decisions and directions, Afghanistan will certainly be a part of that. And as needed, General Nicholson does participate in that. So I don't really have a good specific timeline for you, Josh, other than, again, what the Secretary General has said, which is, deliberations will happen this spring, and of course, General Nicholson and the team here will be a part of that as they do.
Phil Wellman, Stars and Stripes. You spoke about ISIS over in the East. I was just wondering if you could comment on the reports that ISIS is being more active in the Northwest. Is this something that you're concerned about, or are you going to do anything in this region to combat ISIS there? And why this region do you think they're moving into?
Yeah, Phil, thank you. First off, we see the same press reporting that ISIS is in the northwest part of the country. Frankly, though, we don't have any other facts to support that. What we do have via our own methods is, again, information that does confirm for us, obviously, there's ISIS in southern Nangarhar. We also do believe that there's an ISIS presence in Kunar, not really because they're trying to expand, but really because they're trying to survive. And Kunar, of course, provides them some level of sanctuary. We don't have anything to support these press reports that say ISIS is out in the Northwest. I think, as many know, if you are just a local thug or a criminal or along those lines, but all of a sudden you portray or characterize your actions or yourself as a member of ISIS, that's going to get international attention. That's going to bring attention to what you're doing. And certainly if you're a local official who's looking for more resources, by saying that ISIS is in your area, you're going to get more attention along those lines. And so at this point, we just don't have any evidence to confirm that members of ISIS who are connected back through the Levant, back through al-Baghdadi and those, are present up in the Northwest. We do acknowledge that there are probably some recruiting efforts that happen in other locations around the country, but at this point, to the best of our knowledge and the best of our information, the ISIS presence is in southern Nangarhar and then a smaller presence in Kunar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Zabiullah Shinwari from Shubshat TV. I want to ask you one question. And recently, Iran and Russia supported Afghan Taliban in Kunduz and other provinces. Why is the NATO silent over the Russia and Iran supported Taliban in Afghanistan?
Well, our concern with that is that, and there's others who can provide you probably better detail, but our concern is that this provision of overt legitimacy, just by recognizing and engaging with the Taliban, that ultimately undermines the government of Afghanistan. The government is chosen by the people, and they are the ones that any foreign nation should be engaging in. And so this recognition or this dialogue provides this overt legitimacy, which actually undermines the efforts of the government. And it's not helpful for the government, but it's certainly not helpful for the people of Afghanistan. And so that is really our concern with it.
It's Russia and Iran gave weapons to the Taliban. What will we do to stop destruction of the Russian Iran?
Well, again, our larger aspect of it is obviously every nation, be it the government of Afghanistan or whomever, has their own bilateral relations. And so our real role with this is to focus on supporting the security services so that they've got the capability to defend themselves. But again, our view is that any engagement with the Taliban by external actors is ultimately going to be counterproductive, and it's just going to undermine the legitimate efforts of the government of Afghanistan.
I'm Samin from Tulu News. I wanted to ask about the, first of all, kinetic strikes. If you could give us a number. And you have talked about the strike on Taliban in Kunduz, and also there was a strike last week, I guess, in Helmand, in Garmsir province. Is this a sign that there are going to be more direct strikes conducted by the U.S. forces against the Taliban? And also, I wanted to ask that there have been recently, the Pentagon recently announced that there is going to be, the operations of the U.S. forces are going to be broadened in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. If you could give us a little bit detail on that.
Could you ask that second part? Could you say it one more time?
The Pentagon announced that the operations are going to, they're going to broaden the operations in the Pakistan-Afghanistan border against the ISIS.
Yeah, so let me start first with your question about the future of strikes here. So again, in 2016, January 2016, the U.S. government provided U.S. forces with the authority to target ISIS just based on status. So regardless of what their actions are, once they are identified as a member of ISIS, they can be captured or they can be killed. And then in June of last year, President Obama provided U.S. forces here with what's referred to as the Strategic Effects Authority. So the authority to provide combat enablers, in most cases airstrikes, but in other cases it could be logistics support, it could be intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance support to the effort. So really starting last June, and as we know, the fighting really picked up after Ramadan, particularly beginning of August, the United States did conduct a number of kinetic strikes. Those authorities still exist for us, and they are still present. And so the U.S. will likely very aggressively use those authorities, both the Counterterrorism Authority to target ISIS, as well as to target al-Qaeda, but then as well as the Strategic Effects Authority. But again, it's important, this is a little nuanced, but it's important to remember we're not targeting the Taliban simply because they are the Taliban, unlike ISIS. We're targeting any entity that is interfering with the government of Afghanistan's efforts to achieve its strategic goals and its end states. And so we will continue to absolutely provide that. Regarding your second aspect of it, we will absolutely aggressively continue to target ISIS wherever they are. Right now, obviously, the southern Nangarhar place, our location, is where we focus our efforts, and we will continue to aggressively target them really as part of these larger Afghan operations. So as you look at 2017 and what can you expect, I think that you can absolutely expect that the United States will continue to do both of those, to support the government of Afghanistan with these combat enablers, and then certainly to aggressively target ISIS wherever possible.
Mujib Mashal, The New York Times. Three brief things, General. One is, what is your assessment of the levels of violence during the winter months? Any numbers you have, whether there was a drop, whether it was steady? Secondly, any updates on the claims of civilian casualties in Sangin in that investigation? And third, when you look ahead to the spring, what are the most vulnerable spots that you're concerned about?
Great. So, Mujib, thank you very much, as always. Let me begin with your third question first, the vulnerable spots. You know, really our focus right now and our concern continues to be down in the south. Helmand continues to be, in our view, the Taliban's main effort. And it's their main effort for a couple of reasons. Number one is the opium. And the fact that the opium absolutely fuels, and the narco drug trafficking aspect absolutely fuels the insurgency. And we believe that the Taliban makes a lot of money off of that. Mullah Mansour, as you know better than I, deeply involved in that aspect of it. And so we believe that the Taliban will be focused on Helmand, and we believe that one of the big reasons for that is because they want to be able to protect their poppy investments and their drug trafficking, frankly. The other aspect, of course, is it does provide them the ability to pressure other locations in the south, be it Tarankot in Uruzgan or be it Kandahar, et cetera. Being able to gain and try and have a presence in Helmand helps those efforts. So as we move into the spring, the area that we are focused on probably the most is the south, and specifically into Helmand and Uruzgan. You ask about the Sangin Civcas, and of course, as most are aware, there have been allegations of a civilian casualty event in Sangin just about a month ago. And as I think you've all heard me say before as well, we absolutely take any allegation of civilian casualties very, very seriously, and we do investigate it. And it's not just a U.S. investigation, but we involve other NATO officers and others to take a look at what facts do we know and what do we know. Right now, after conducting an initial investigation, and we still hold that open in the event new information comes in, but the best we can tell, there is nothing to confirm that the U.S. airstrikes caused those civilian casualties. It's important to remember that Sangin, of course, has been in the midst of a very difficult and violent fight. We know that there's been a lot of small arms fire back and forth. We know that the Taliban have been firing mortars and artillery. We know that the ANA has been doing the same. We know that the Afghan Air Force has taken strikes, and we know that the U.S. Air Force has taken strikes. But what we've done is we went back and we reviewed all of the video that we have of that period where the allegations emerged. We've also tried to take what we've gotten from the press as well as what we've received from the government on the locations of where those allegations are, and we've tried to correlate it to where we know strikes occurred. And at this point, we cannot find anything that would confirm that those U.S. airstrikes caused civilian casualties. Is it possible? It is possible. But at this point, we can't find anything to confirm it. And so we will continue to work to do our best to determine really what are the facts with that. And again, even one casualty, Mujib, is too many civilian casualties. And so our deepest sympathies go out to any civilians who have suffered with that. And again, that's part of the reason why we work so hard to try and make the Afghan security services as strong as they can possibly be so that we can ultimately end this conflict. And then the final question you asked was assessing the levels of violence over the winter. I think there's probably not one general answer for the country. Of course, Helmand, as you know better than I do, warmer. There has been a lot of fighting that continued. The same thing happened in the winter of 15 and 16, of course, where the fighting continued in that area. In other parts of the country, we saw a dramatic decrease in the overall fighting. That may have been a result of weather. It may have been a result of the Taliban trying to refit themselves, et cetera. But I don't have any good statistics for you specifically on that. But again, in the South, we have seen, obviously, a reduction in violence, but there's still been too much violence. And then in other parts of the country, it's been reduced significantly.
Anne Charon, Agence France Presse. General, we are expecting a few hundreds of Marines to be deployed in Helmand that spring. Do you have any precision about that?
Sure.
And my second question would be, do you have any evidence about the Taliban or ISIS recruiting more people, having more resources, and giving you a sense of the violence still to come over the next coming months? Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. First off, on the Marines to Helmand, I think everybody's aware that the United States Department of Defense has publicly announced that an element of the U.S. Marines will come in to replace the current Army soldiers that are down in Helmand conducting the train, advise, and assist mission. The Marines will begin arriving probably the end of April, beginning of May, somewhere in that time frame. Don't have specific dates, but it won't all be in one big day, if you will. It will happen over the period of a matter of weeks. And we're thrilled to have the Marines coming in. Of course, they do have history down in Helmand, and we think that they will carry on exactly what's been happening down there. So they're not going to have a different mission. They're not going to be doing anything different than the soldiers that are currently down there. They are the scheduled backfill and rotation for those soldiers who will complete their mission, and they will head back to the United States. So we're looking forward to seeing them here. And then specifically on the Taliban and the ISIS resources, we don't have a tremendous amount of information on that right now. And of course, last year it was our belief that the death of Mullah Mansour really did challenge the Taliban financial system, because much of that was in Mullah Mansour's head, and he had all the contacts for it, and the evidence of that we saw was really an increase in the taxes on farmers. But as we start really and moving into March of 2017, I don't have a lot of additional information for you on that right now.
We have a question right here.
Thanks, sir. It's Naveed Yusufi, freelance journalist. So I want to have your remarks regarding the current attack of Pakistan border side RPG attacks. So what's your remarks? And second one is that what is the RS last message for insurgents? Last message of RS.
Great.
What's your last message for them? If they didn't stop their attack, or if they didn't join the peace process, what's your last message?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. So first off, obviously any tension and any violence along the border is counterproductive, and it comes with real risk for all sides involved. And so obviously this is a bilateral discussion and a bilateral relationship between the government of Afghanistan and the Pakistan. But our very strong view is that all involved have absolutely got to take every step they can to de-escalate this situation. Because when we look at the current cause, the atrocious terrorist attacks that occurred in Pakistan, it reminds us all that terrorism in Kabul or terrorism in Quetta or terrorism in Sindh province, ultimately you have innocent civilians that are being murdered and being wounded. And to address these types of issues, it really requires regional solutions. And so our strong recommendation is that all involved have got to work together to address these types of terrorist threats, because it affects the civilians of Afghanistan and the civilians of Pakistan equally. On your second question about the message for the Taliban, again, our very strong message is that there is no military solution to this effort. It's absolutely got to be an Afghan reconciliation. And there, of course, there are examples of that, and it can be done. But there is absolutely no military solution to this. The security services are getting stronger. They are not going to lose militarily. And what we believe is that there's got to be a reconciliation, and that's ultimately the direction that we believe the government of Afghanistan wants to head as well. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm Hanif Umid from Nagat TV.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was a very difficult year for Afghan army. Afghanistan passed a very difficult year. There were conflicts in more than 15 provinces of Afghanistan, and more than 5,000 Afghan soldiers were killed. What's your assessment about the coming conflict season? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And I would agree with you. 2016 was a difficult year, and we do think that 2017 is also going to be challenging. We do think that actions, for example, the death of Mullah Salam is a step in the right direction, particularly in the north. We think the fact that the security services are stronger today than they were 4 months ago, that is going to help as well. But ultimately, we do think that it will be a challenging year and that there is going to be continued violence. And it is going to be something that the government is going to have to focus on very, very closely. Our hope, though, is that there are, again, members of the Taliban who are going to recognize that they're not going to win militarily and they've got to move towards reconciliation and ultimately become a part of making something better in Afghanistan than continuing this destruction that we do see, be it in Sangin, be it in Kunduz, be it wherever.
Next question. Josh?
On the going back to your comments about the special forces and their heavy use last year, I mean, you know, shouldering a significant majority of the offensive operations you mentioned. First question: how does this fit in with the coalition's stated goal of, you know, creating sustainable institutions for Afghanistan? I mean, is this a sustainable, you know, mode of prosecuting the war here that you guys are encouraging or you know, supporting for them? And then two, do you think that the fact that, you know, special forces are some of the units that are most closely integrated or closely tied with coalition forces, do you think the presence and that those ties with the coalition helped push those offensive operations more so than they might have been otherwise?
Great. Josh, thank you very much. So, you know, the ultimate effort with the ANA is to, again, have an organization where each part of that organization can play its part and its role. And so the Special Operations Forces, again, are exceptional. And they were perhaps overtaxed and overutilized during 2016. The real goal is to get the conventional corps up to the same level of proficiency at their job that the special forces are at their job, if you will. So we want these corps to be able to conduct their operations without having to misuse, if you will, the special operations forces so they can do what it is that they do very, very well. So the model would be, you know, you could look at some of the corps that have performed very well. The 203rd Corps, for example, down in Paktika, Host, and Hasdi. That corps has done very well, and they conduct offensive operations very, very well. The 201st Corps, again, these operations down in Nangarhar, those were conventional operations that they've been able to conduct in Cotton Day Bala. And then there are other places where you probably still are going to have to use the special forces to give that Afghan punch. But ultimately, you know, the special forces will continue to be this, and this is, you know, something that the U.S. military talks about all the time, but this force multiplier, where they're able to be put into an area and they do a lot more than was necessarily anticipated or expected. And what we're working towards is getting the corps to the point where they're doing not the special forces mission, but they are just as competent and professional. And so that is really the direction we're going. On the closer ties to the coalition, again, you know, there has been a long and it's been a very continuous relationship with coalition special operations forces and their Afghan counterparts. And we think that that has absolutely paid off. But I think it's important, and you've heard me say this before as well, when we look at 2016, particularly by the conclusion, the numbers remained about the same. About 80% of the Afghan special operations missions are conducted completely independent of the coalition with no support whatsoever. Of that remaining 20%, about 10% of those missions are what we would refer to as enabled, where we will help with some of the planning. They may receive some logistics or intelligence support, but then the Afghans go out and they conduct the missions by themselves. And then the remaining 10%, only about 10% of the time do we have coalition forces who go out into the field with the Afghan special operations forces. So by and large, it is a very autonomous and independent organization, and where we provide help is on really a very small fraction of their larger missions.
We have time for one more question. Saeed?
So, I wanted to ask about the terrorist safe havens. General Nicholson has talked about it openly at the hearing before the Senate. He said that it's undermining the stability of Afghanistan, the safe havens of terrorists in Pakistan. So, I mean, some of the senators has also said that, I mean, they were asking what could be done about it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is being done about it? I mean, is have there been talks with the Pakistani authorities?
Yeah, so I mean, thank you. Well, first off, I think, you know, I probably can't add anything more to General Nicholson's comments than what he already said. I think they kind of speak for themselves in many ways. In terms of the dialogue and the relationship and the engagement, you know, those are really engagements that happen at a diplomatic level. So from a pure Resolute Support military level, our focus remains on Afghanistan and on engaging with that. And so I'd have to refer you really to other nations that engage with the government of Pakistan and how they do that. So again, our big effort, though, and our role in that is to train and prepare the security services. So again, they can defend their own borders and they can address issues in their own country, be it sanctuaries, be it whatever the case may be. And so that's the direction that we're working towards.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Sir, if you have any closing remarks, you're welcome to make those.
Great. Again, I appreciate everybody taking the time today. As always, if we can follow up on something, if we can help you with something, please do reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help however best we can. Hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.